Welcome to Modern Stoic Insights. Jake's gaze on me wasn't the only thing that caught my attention. I know that because of the way he made me feel. May seem odd, particularly taking into account our different ages, yet something was seen in his eyes, something heartfelt and genuine that moved me momentarily forget that I was in my late 40s, with the gentle contours of experience that is really imprinted into my flesh. While I was sitting there, a part of me started to enjoy and accept the reality that I was an elderly lady, and that I may not have been not visible to Jake had a certain vibe about him, the kind that could cause you to feel as if you were the world's sole individual. Who it important that he moved fluidly, as smooth as if the whole beach was his to us, and I could hear the sand crunching softly under his bare feet. He changed stances in an attempt to capture a more cozy stance in the sun. I was unable to ignore the way his G sometimes returned to me. It wasn't overt or very severe at the moment, just a leisurely, purposeful look that seems to express a comprehension and knowledge of who I was as a woman. Now, I wasn't certain he understood the significance of it. To me at that time to be seen as something, but I was also aware of something else, something that tightened my guts. Not only did he admire me, but there was anything more profound in the manner he examined. He desired more than a casual relationship with me. He desired a genuine, and I was sitting on my towel, sprawled out. I became aware that I wasn't really certain whether I was prepared for whatever it entailed. My skin felt warm from the light, and a little breeze is blowing over me. Bringing with it the ocean's salt, Jake rolled onto his stomach. Supporting himself with his elbows in order to look at the horizon, I used this time to observe him. Upon closer inspection, his black hair was still moist from the sea, shimmering under his skin was almost brown from the sun's rays. His physique was golden in the sunshine, toned in a manner that was unique to when I was younger. I realized how I was nevertheless keenly aware of every detail of I had always been in my own body. Even as a younger lady, self-conscious, currently so near me in a bikini with Jake, I was very conscious of how old I was. The wrinkles around my eyes were lessened due to Every time I smiled, my eyes became deeper. Now my body moved with a delicate grace. Something seemed both familiar and unfamiliar at the "You look excellent, and you're aware of Jake's." His voice pierced my mind. Although the words were informal, I could hear the genuineness underneath them. I sensed an odd flutter in my chest that is a combination of comfort and flattery. "Thank you," I responded, trying to maintain my TB. Light, but something stood in the way. He made a statement that implied he wasn't only discussing the bikini, or he was the way the light grabbed my hair. Discussing something more profound, I wasn't certain if I was prepared to admit. "However, I've always liked older ladies," said somewhat too carelessly, as if it were the most instinctive words to use. Something about them seems to assurance that the experience is unique based on your interactions with younger people. There's more. Actually, I felt a little grin pull at my mouth. Even I found that there was something so straightforward about him, which wasn't usual particularly for someone his age to be so forthcoming. About anything similar, I was unable to admiration, but it also made me uncomfortable, really. I'm whispering as I go ahead. My towel, to give him extra face time. I'm not immediately aware of anything that he laughed at the sound of the light, and simple, "I believe you do," he replied. Gently, there's a presence that comes with, "I believe you have lived, you know. You've seen things that have shaped who you are." Did I not reply to him right away? The words lingered in the air, and I sensed something inside of me was stirring, but it wasn't just the complimentary remarks or the way he kept looking at me was the way he seemed to comprehend things about me that I hadn't permitted. Actually, I haven't seen anybody else in years. hadn't even viewed it in its entirety. For a long time, I simply listened to myself. Allowing the sound of the waves to Jake was the ocean that calmed my rushing mind. Regarding one item, there was the assurance in aging an item that comes from having experienced everything types of encounters, but there was furthermore a vulnerability I wasn't really aware of. One thing I was unwilling to face, thought I had entered something new deep, but more than that, I thought. At last, I had always been concerned about my age. Something had been taken away by my experiences, from me, but I then realized that I had received more from them. They had endowed me with the knowledge to understand when to seize the opportunity, when to succumb to the bliss of being completely observed and completely, I said, alive. I never expected this. My little voice amid the silence of the Jake grinned and gave me a hug in the evening hand. The greatest things ever are the ones that surprise us, and when the sun sets directing its last golden rays over the sand, I was aware that this moment I would remember the connection for a long time. We departed from the beach, which was a reminder that no of where we were, there was always space for love in life. Link and for development, the beach once, a peaceful refuge has become the backdrop for something for which I wasn't really prepared. The sun was starting to slowly set, throwing a gentle golden light toward the horizon glow over the sensation of the sand under us. It was vanishing into the cozy arms of the earth. The surrounding environment seemed to disappear while I sat there looking at Jake's a quiet invitation with a hand still close to mine between us. My heart was dangling. I glanced at him as his heart pounded loudly. His face was straightforward and honest, yet he had a raw look in his eyes, no pretension, a level of intensity comparable to my own racing ideas that I was no longer able to ignore. Something had changed, and it wasn't only for a little while. This was Jake, my words trailed off as I searched for the words, yet he outshone me in, I am aware that his eyes were never murmured. I understand that leaving Mai is difficult. However, it need not be at this moment. I have spent years constructing here, barriers persuading myself that certain I wasn't intended for this, no more, yet he was still shattering them. His words, broken down piece by piece, were like a bomb to a wound I was unaware of was still there. Cautiously and gently, I stretched out to bridge the gap between us. The once my fingertips touched, I felt a rush of warmth from him. I had never been that honest with anybody before. Like this, he didn't pull for a long time. Instead, he leaned his lips forward, stroking me with such gentleness that left me speechless. The kiss was tender, like the soft crash of the waves, at first hesitant, but increasing against the coast. With every second that goes by, his warm and demanding lips were there, yet there. They had a sensitivity that resonated with something more profound, something more. I felt vulnerable as I returned his kiss. I feel a torrent of emotions for a long time, buried longs for the pleasure of being seen by being sought after, and the unexpected insight that I was here for more than just him. For me, here, Jack's hands moved to my shoulders as well, dragging me. The weight of his touch was both closer and consoling and thrilling. I could sense the power between his body and mine, his heat oozing into my own flesh. His hands moved to his chest. Following the lines of his muscular contours, the feel of his flesh under my fingers, I withdrew for a brief moment of being out of breath, my heart pounding in I searched in his ears and eyes for any indication of skepticism, but none, just the same unrestrained passion as he have always understood our purpose. I didn't realize I had a voice, trembling due to the severity of the moment that I never imagined feeling like. Once again Jake grinned at the corners of his eyes, wrinkled in such a manner that he seems even more charming. You both deserve this. Take action before I can speak another word. My lips met yours once again, this time with additional. His hands slipped down my back in haste, bringing me closer and closer till there was no distance between us, and I sensed the warmth of his body against mine, life's pulse coursing through him, and it was. The kiss became more intense and intoxicating. The world around us is become more urgent, disappearing, the beach, the ocean, the fading. They were all distant memories of sunshine. Now the only thing that mattered was how we moved in unison, as his touch caused me to feel alive in a manner that I was unaware of. Potentially no longer. As his hands lowered, I didn't retreat. Instead, I let him explore. I was no longer the lady who allowed us, who was hesitant to ask what I was the lady who deserved to, who could resist the need to embrace this moment. Him completely and without reservation. I am unsure of how long we will remain like way, engrossed in each other's time. Felt unimportant. When we eventually withdrew our rapid, shallow breathing, I sensed a calm feeling of tranquility descends over me. The environment we were in was still there, although it didn't matter anymore. Together we were present, and that was sufficient. We laid side by side in quiet for a long time, just listening to the swells, and steady pounding of the sun has almost disappeared from our hearts, disappearing behind the horizon, leaving the most delicate shades of orange and pink in. It was the most beautiful sunset in the sky. I had seen it before, but it wasn't the vista that captured my interest. He was laying beside me, his hand. The quiet continued as they rested on mine. Before he spoke again, he was heavy and charged. Do you think his voice is much more than a whisper? Are curious about what it might be like to simply relax and don't worry about what people assume, that this is just us? His words were suddenly caught in mid-air. In the afternoon's warmth for I considered pulling at that time. Returning to the topic of shutting down this was, but in all honesty, I didn't want to conceal any longer. Want to deny the sensation that had been developing that oddly within of me. Euphoric combination of enthusiasm and vulnerability was frightening, to be sure, but additionally it was exciting. I turned to give him my whole attention. Heart pounding in my... I've never let go of my chest like that, I murmured. Silently, I don't even know how Jake's hand remained resting on his fingers, curling slightly close to mine, as though requesting approval. His eyes were patiently for my next move. I could see the trust in his eyes as he moved, the transparency that reflected mine doubt. I believe he said slowly, I could work things out with you. Sense his presence even in his absence, observing me with a calm vitality that seemed to envelop us. The shoreline had increased in temperature as the sun rose higher, extending the shadows over the beach. The smell of salt permeated the air, and the gentle sound of waves breaking. Jake sprawled out against the beach, beside me once again, but this time there was a little change in his carrying style himself, in the manner in which his gaze continued to... It wasn't simply casual for me, no longer the words that had been spoken between us before, but now it seemed like they felt like if we had just opened a door. Couldn't get near enough to what he was staring at me in a different way, and I was forced to sense its draw. My heart beats a little faster, a little quicker every time our eyes locked. I couldn't bring myself to break, however. There was an odd kind of stillness there, comfort in our relationship even. Despite this, I had a knowing feeling that, unsure, he moved once again, putting himself on his elbow. Although his body felt at ease, there was anything about his stance that implied that he was about to speak. Something more crucial. May I ask you a question? Jake's. The voice was nearly low. I looked at him with some hesitancy, but intrigued. Yes? He paused for a second, glancing. He traced his fingers down to the sand. Trends in the do you ever have the feeling that cereals... It's not appropriate for you to want certain items no longer due to your advanced age. I mean, you're expected to make a compromise. Otherwise, his tone faltered as if he wasn't sure. On how to complete the chest thinking tightened in response to his inquiry. It was an underlying reality that I had endured, for I had hidden certain things for years. Sentiments, wants, and aspects of myself that I had pushed aside, as I believed they were prohibited in my late 40s. Grew to think that attraction and desire were not for older ladies, but rather for the notion that I should feel more wanted in exchange seemed like a luxury I wasn't qualified to. "I don't know anymore," I murmured softly, my voice that is almost a whisper. "You must reach a certain age, I suppose, and you begin to believe that you're invisible, as if you shouldn't want the same things you did at the time of Jake, who was younger, gazed at me before his kind but piercing eyes, as if he were looking for anything in my— "I don't believe it to be true," he said strongly, as if he were persuading himself as much as I do. "I believe. No matter what, we all deserve to desire things. Our ages. And I believe you're lovely on the inside, you know," and his remarks struck a chord in me that I hadn't anticipated, that there will be some kind of— how openly and honestly he expressed them. It gave me a sense of being seen in a manner that was nearly overpowering, that I was unsure of how to reply. But I didn't need to go on air. Was full with emotion between us, and I could sense our separation. Decreasing and encroaching on something unsaid but profoundly felt, I moved uneasily in an attempt to conceal the warmth that is enveloping my cheeks. I wasn't feeling ashamed. Something else was involved. It was the understanding that, for the first time in an extended period of time, when someone was really searching at me using love, not sympathy, not distance, but genuine. In a quiet manner, I expressed my appreciation for Jake, shattering a little as I grabbed for the terms that you're not familiar with. He grinned at me, but it wasn't a fun one. Smile no more. There was something more delicate, vulnerable. I am aware that he stated in a low voice, his eyes never departing, "I recognize you as the lady you are. No longer the lady you were, or the you believe you should be a lady for a when all else vanished. The warmth of the sun and the murmur of the waves, the soft cadence of our breaths. We were the only two of us. Sharing anything in this large area, neither of us has a complete understanding yet. However, we both felt we could feel the tension between us. Kind of humming electric current, waiting just under the surface for the ideal time to succeed, and I could sense this irrefutable pull, the attraction that had developed between us. Every moment we arrived at this beach, he was a lot younger than I was, and however, it didn't matter what at that time. What mattered was the relationship we had anticipated. Ed, the comprehension that went by Jake, reached across between us in silence, his hand softly lying on the towel, his fingers brushed across mine. The slightest touch on my skin, yet it was plenty to make me shudder. Didn't retreat. Rather, I discovered myself drawing nearer to him, not simply both emotionally and physically, but Jake was directly before me with that gentle smiling disarmingly, and I couldn't dispute that something stirred within of me. And it was. He didn't stare at me like some elderly lady who had lived through better times, but as someone deserving of respect, and that was a gift. "I believe I get it," I murmured quietly. Finally seeing him in the eye is pleasant. He nodded his gaze. "Seen, isn't it?" Darkening. It is a little bit of a gap between us now. Felt heavy and charged. We both couldn't identify who we were. There were just two individuals on the beach for a while. Was establishing an unsaid relationship I had no idea how to get about, yet couldn't disregard. And then Jake abruptly changed. He stretched his arms and pulled himself up, in a long, leisurely stretch over his head as he made eye contact with me once more, and I sensed a change in the air between us. Was no longer just It was informal yet intimate enough that made my mind and heart racing. Nevertheless, he remained silent, but his eyes' intensity conveyed all about him. I could sense that they were falling for me in my